So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of what used to be called Mind Your Own Black Business. As previously said, we're going through a process of growth and learning. So, right now, it's now Biz Talk. So, tonight, I'm honored to have a really special guest who's on the show. As you might have seen from the promo, and he'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong in this. As an organization, it's a London-based venture capitalist firm, and they are looking to invest around 100 million in underrepresented individuals and businesses. Am I so far so correct?
So far so correct.
Awesome, great stuff. And we're lucky today to have with us Eric Collins, who happens to be the CEO of ImpactX and one of the general partners. Now, since Eric is here, I'm going to let Eric tell us a little bit about himself. So first of all, thank you ever so much for coming on the show. Really excited to hear about what you're doing. And yeah, so first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, thank you very much for having me. ImpactX, came about because a group of Black people got together here in the UK and said that we're tired of having the conversation about what is the challenge and what's the problems that are facing underrepresented people in the UK, and we need to start putting our money where our mouth is and solving them. So that was the impetus, and that's sort of been my entire life. I grew up in the United States. I grew up right after the most active portion of the civil rights movement.
Okay.
I grew up on a Black college campus, one of the historically Black colleges and universities, and then my parents moved us to New York for a little bit, and then I grew up in what was the epicenter of the second wave of the civil rights movement, places where the students were sitting at lunch counters in order to make sure that they could integrate those lunch counters at Woolworth in Greensboro, North Carolina. And that's where I grew up. So I'm very much steeped in this idea that if you want something to happen, you might actually have to put yourself at risk to make it happen. You might have to step out in an uncomfortable way and step out on faith.
Okay, definitely. So you're from the States, then why have you decided to focus? Because it seems like from the profile that you're focusing on the European market. Might I ask how that came about?
I moved to London in 2014. I moved here to Chief Revenue and Distribution Officer of a company called SwiftKey, which is an AI company. Can you hear me okay?
You seem to be cutting out a little bit, so just struggling to hear you a bit.
Yeah, I'm finding the same thing when we're talking. So maybe if you go on mute when I'm talking, I'll go on mute when you're talking.
Okay, we can try that.
Let's try that.
Okay, so give me 2 seconds. Muted.
All right. So one of the things that happened with, so I came over to help run this organization. It was a fast growth company. It was in the AI space. So SwiftKey, you probably use it. If you were sitting any day and you're writing a text, or if you're sort of, posting something and you are using the technology that then completes your words, that's a technology that is an AI. It's an artificial intelligence product, and it has the consumer application because it's trying to predict what it is that you want to have happen in a certain field, and that a certain written field. And that's what I was doing here when I first came. I stayed there for 2 years, and then we sold it to a company called Microsoft, which everybody knows. And then I went as chief operating officer of another company that was a health tech company. And that health tech company was involved in how do you get safe surgery to the 5.5 billion people in the world who don't have it, who can't just sort of, rock up to the hospital and know that when they come out, they're going to actually be made better. Instead, they find themselves with a very low density of doctors and surgeons who have been specially trained for whatever. And so I then ran that organization, and we sold that earlier this year to Medtronic. So I have been here in the UK building businesses that have been started by other people for a long time. Well, 7 years to me is a long time in a career, and especially in the fast growth space.
So, I mean, it seems like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, they're quite very tech heavy type companies focusing on tech. I also noticed when I was looking at the website, so that between you and your partners, I believe that you've mentioned some of the stuff that you've done, but between you, it seems like you've managed over 12 billion investment funding or whatever, whichever which way. So how do you go from what I am assuming is a role that you really enjoy, you really love, you're getting to work with some of the really big companies in the big tech to go and start this, which is focused on the areas that you've mentioned?
Well, I think you eventually have to make a decision. For me, it was a portfolio decision. Do I continue contributing to a single organization until that organization sells? And I've been doing that for years. I've actually exited in 4 different companies, coming in at the C level, growing it to a certain level, and then selling it on. It's just a skill that I have in terms of scaling organizations. And you can do that one by one. And that's sort of the role that I've had as an operating exec, or you can take a more of a portfolio approach. So I determined at this stage of my career, it made sense to take a portfolio approach and say that I could bring my skills to a whole set of organizations. And currently at ImpactX, we've closed on 18 deals. The last one we closed on 2 weeks ago. So we are finding a lot of deals that we can apply my talents and the talents of the investment and other team to those organizations, which allows us then to sort of leverage all those separate experiences and then focus them on a range of companies from health tech companies straight through to fintech companies, straight through to some production companies that are working on creating creative content. So that's the reason why I did it. And it's not that I recommend it for everyone, but for a person who's been working for 25, 30 years, the question of what are you going to do with all that experience, and are you going to do the same thing again, or are you going to try something different, made sense for me.
Awesome. And it sounds like there's obviously, based on your background, like you mentioned, civil rights areas and where you've come from, there's a social consciousness that I'm detecting and picking up from what you're saying in some of the stuff there. So what is the actual vision for ImpactX?
So our vision is to create a more just and empowered world for underrepresented entrepreneurs. And I should say underrepresented means any person. So if you look at the venture capital companies, and there are 100, 150 here in the UK, if you look at those companies, they have invested in hundreds of organizations. And what we do is we look at their portfolios and we say, who haven't you invested in over time? And those are the people we want to invest in, because there's an inefficiency in the market that we can then actually address. And by addressing that inefficiency, we have the opportunity for arbitrage, meaning we can get in at a lower price. We can own more of the company. We can help the company more because we have more power. And then we can help them to accelerate all their milestones through exit. And that's the name of the game in venture capital. So, we decided underrepresented made sense because there's an inefficiency in that space. And, we would have known that
Sure.
without doing the research. And in addition to that, we know that this is the place where we believe there's going to be real opportunity to create the next Netflix, the next Airbnb, the next Uber, or the next Google or Amazon, because we believe that these are the types of, or even the next Marvel universe.
Of course.
Because we believe that in underrepresented populations, across any population, there is competence and there's ability. And that the thing which isn't equal among all populations in terms of the distribution of, is opportunity because of capital. And our intention is to address that capital gap, to make available to people and entrepreneurs who need it. Well, not just need it, but satisfy certain criteria, because we don't give the money to anyone. We have 1,000 companies that have come to us and we've only invested in 18. So obviously most don't make it through our very rigorous evaluation process. But for those who do, we want to make sure that we are then providing the underpinnings to help make them very successful. And again, make them, instead of like a restaurant chain, which is one kind of organization, and you saw what happened to restaurant chains during COVID.
Yep.
We think that we really want to create Amazon, and we saw what happened with Amazon and with Zoom.
And Zoom, exactly.
So, but these are organizations that have a very different sort of a trajectory. And we think if we can also not only create those companies, but if we create them with Black founders and women-led and women founders and people with disabilities, we're not going to have to go retrofit them later in this idea of D&I. Because from their beginning, they will be diverse. From the beginning, they're going to be inclusive, and they're going to give opportunities at the board level, the C-suite, and they're also going to give decision-making responsibility in the engineering organization to people of color and to women. and that will create a different world. So we're looking to empower people in a different way and create a different sort of a world than the one that is actually being reinforced on a daily basis through Silicon Valley, through what's happening in the UK, what happens in Luxembourg. All of them are reinforcing a certain view of the world, and we think that it's time to make sure and we think there's certainly space for something else to happen.
Sure. So, I mean, you mentioned some of the data there. I mean, some of the personal experiences, at least my personal experiences and people that I know, is there seems to be a Black businesses tend to get less funding, less access to funding. Is that something that you also found in your data? And do you think, I mean, what are some of the reasons why you might be seeing that?
The funny thing is, I'm going to add another piece of data. Yes, it's very clear. Black businesses get less funding. If you are a Black person in the UK last year and you were trying to get venture capital, of the venture capital billions that went out, 0.5% went to Black entrepreneurs, so Afro-Caribbean, and about 2.9% went to women of any race. So that is of 100%. That's less than 4% went to those two groups combined. So when we say women, we mean all women founding teams.
Of course.
There's some teams that are diverse, and so they don't necessarily count in that number. So those are the miserable numbers that we're dealing with in 2019. And we also know some other data, which is very interesting, is that about 50% of Black people in the UK are living in poverty. And that was as of 2018-19. That's not even given COVID now. We can imagine what the numbers look like now in terms of Black families living in poverty, whereas white families, so that's 1 in 2 families live in poverty, whereas white families, 1 in 5 families live in poverty. Another interesting fact then, which I think ties all this together, is that when you look at the numbers, and these studies have been done by McKinsey, these studies have been done by the Kauffman Fellows Research Center, many times, Harvard Business School. Diverse founding teams they actually over time raise more money, and they actually deliver at a 30% premium over all white male teams. So quite frankly, the funny thing is that we're dealing with a fallacy. I think that there's this mythology out there that underrepresented means that somehow the returns aren't going to be as good. The returns actually tend to be better when you're looking at diverse teams. And the diversity creates all sorts of conflicts and friction, which creates knowledge, opportunity, resilience, and the ability to get better results. So this has been proven many times. So yes, it is true that these companies get less funding, whether it be from banks by loans, and we know that there's discrimination and racism there and systemic issues, whether it be through equity investing, which is venture capital, or even it comes from selling things to other people in terms of your own revenue streams, that those sorts of things, Black companies tend to have less of those types of inbound capital sources, and capital is necessary for every business.
Wow. I mean, the figures that you just, the day you gave, if I'm going to be honest, it's overwhelmed me. I realized it was bad, but I didn't realize it was that bad. I just didn't realize it. And I guess that's why data, actually having the figures to back up some of these conversations, is very useful, because it really drives home some of the challenges that we're talking about, some of the issues that we're facing, and some of the work that needs to go into actually readdressing some of those challenges, which, from what I'm hearing, is part of what ImpactX is doing out there. It's trying to address that big issue. It sounds like a big issue. Now,
can I just say one thing? The only way you can address these, one of the ways that you can address these issues, there are many ways, but one way to address them is actually by doing what ImpactX is doing, and that is creating return for investors. So, many people have, because of George Floyd, and all that sort of state-sanctioned murder, a lot of people became very sensitized, and organizations that we hadn't seen speak out about these issues became very sensitized and somewhat vocal about the issue of, what to do about inequities that exist around being Black in the world.
Sure.
And one of the things that we noted from all of those conversations was that intentions are not good enough, that you actually have to do something with that intention. Good thoughts is hardly sufficient to be able to create a just and equitable world. So quite frankly, that's what we're in the business of, our set of people who have a true belief in what we're talking about, and then other people who are allies. And what we know is that we have to do something that actually shows that money can be made. Not that money is needed, but that money can actually be made. And so return on capital is absolutely imperative. And so we are not, sometimes when we walk into a room, people think that we're talking about sort of charitable giving, or we're looking for philanthropic pounds and pence. We're actually looking for investment pounds and pence. We want to invest the endowment of Oxford University. We want to invest the pension funds of legal in general. We want to do all of those types of things. And that is part of what we're spending our time telling people about and showing by our track record.
Awesome. I mean, that's really great to hear. I mean, one of the things that we always say, definitely on the show as well, is, some of the challenges that we sense and face in our communities, a lot of it is going to be down to us as individuals to be able to solve them. I mean, we know what the problems are and we're living in it. You just, like I said, just overwhelmed with that number of 50% of Black people in the UK living and the poverty line. Is just like, within poverty, it's just outstanding. But ultimately, it's going to be down to people like us. Now, so before you mentioned about criteria, you also mentioned about various stages which you're involved in businesses. So from beginning, seeding, scaling, and exiting. So ImpactX as a venture capitalist firm, at what points do you come in, or what is kind of the stage criteria for any business who might want to come and speak to you about potential funding?
It's a very good question, and it's useful for people who are listening, who might think what I want to do is to raise money from an organization to help me to grow my business, is that we come in after you've shown us that you have a business.
Okay.
And a concept written on a piece of paper and with a pretty presentation around it, that's not going to get an investment. That's called pre-seed, because it's at the concept stage and it doesn't necessarily have the product or the service actually shown in the marketplace. Sure. We look at organizations that have product market fit, i.e. the product exists, it actually is a real product, that there are people who can actually use it and have used it, and that people are willing to pay for it.
Okay.
Enterprises are willing to pay for it, and you're going to then be scaling that business. That's what we are doing. We want to make sure you have a product. We want to make sure you have a market. We want to make sure you have a business model that you're at least willing to test. Now, it doesn't mean that you have made lots of money, but you've had to have made some money from your concept. So if, say, for instance, you were a consultant and you're taking your consulting work and you're saying, I know how to find Black talent to work in the music industry. And you say, I'm going to do something which actually automates that. And then, people can record, and then that recording can actually go through an algorithm, and that algorithm can determine who's going to be a hit song, what's a hit maker.
Okay.
If you said that to me, I'd say, oh, that's fantastic. Let me see the product. If you said, okay, we have the product, that'd be great. And if you said, we have 100,000 users, that would be great. And that those users keep on growing by about 100, 200 a day, that would be excellent. And then if you said that we actually were monetizing that either through merchandise sales, or you said to me that we were monetizing that through advertising, and that we were able to make on a monthly basis about 4,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 a month, that's a conversation that we're interested in having. Before all of those things happen, it's not one of those things. Before all of those things happen, it's very difficult for us to invest, because we're not very good at saying, let's look in the future, way in the future, and see whether or not this is a good idea. Ours is much better. Let's see how you've executed. Let's see how well your team is, how many people you brought around the table, and we know how to help you to scale to get bigger.
Okay, so it sounds like it's not so much about duration of the business, it's more around all the supporting data. So what I'm hearing there is a proven market, not an MVP, so actually something that's out in the marketplace, which can demonstrate demand. So it's been validated in terms of demand that's coming in, and also can demonstrate that it's actually got longevity. It's just potentially sustainable, because it's not just a one-off demand, not seasonal demand, it's ongoing demand backed by the data, all the relevant metrics. Then you'd sit down.
We would love to talk to those organizations.
Okay, great stuff.
Organizations.
So I'm gonna ask a cheeky question here, because it's just the way it is. So you mentioned some numbers there. You said somebody, if they're making 4,000, 8,000, 100,000 a month, then they can come and talk to you. What could they expect to be looking at in terms of potential funding? If somebody out there, any of the listeners out there, have got proven models like that.
Do you know what? So the way that we fund, it's very easy, quite frankly. We look at your company, we look at comparable companies, because there's a company somewhere else in the world who has sort of the same idea or similar idea. We look to see what their value was, their valuation, and then we say that we will use that to help us determine what valuation you should have. And then the amount of money that we put in will determine how much of the company we then own. So we look at various factors. Generally, we're looking at comparables in the marketplace. If there are no comparables, we'll then look at your metrics and we'll say, okay, so you don't have any, you're gaining, 100,000 new users a month. And each user, we're going to put a value on of £3 over the lifetime value. And so if we look to see how much you're building, we can then infer what is the valuation for the company. We talk to the entrepreneurs about this, and they have ideas also. And then we negotiate to what we think is the appropriate value for the organization, for the investment that we make in the organization. It's just, it's mathematics, it's a bit of research, it's some negotiation. That's all it is. It's not rocket science or magic.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a numbers game. So, so for some entrepreneurs, it's not always just the money, like as we saw many times in Dragon's Den. Sometimes they also need support and everything else to then scale it into this new world to get to that point. Is that something that they can also get, or you would help them to get alongside the funding if they pass your rigorous criteria?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things, that's one of our value adds. If you think about, there's lots of money out there. I think everyone probably hears on a daily basis, there's another organization that's raised a certain amount of money. There's a new financial model for putting money into companies, all of that. A new company like that you'd never heard about before and is now valued at 300 billion pounds, dollars, yen, whatever it is. So there's a lot of money out there. The thing that we don't have a lot of is we don't have a lot of experiences that are similar to the entrepreneurs on the one side of the table and the investors on the other side of the table that can come together and then talk about what are the challenges the entrepreneur is going to face that might derail them and help, or what are the things that can be done in order to help them to strap on some rockets and then become, sort of jet propelled into the stratosphere. And ImpactX has got around the table, our entire investment team is made up of a group of women and then men, mostly women. The majority of our investment team is made up of women who have experience in the world as being Black and being a woman, growing businesses and seeing that done many, many times. Our wider team of investors is also very interested in what's going on. And these are very successful Black people in the world. You have everyone from Rick Lewis, who has the biggest Black business in the UK, to Ursula Burns, the only Black woman who's ever run a Fortune 500 company in the United States when she ran Xerox's chair and CEO. And then you have, the national treasure, Lenny Henry. All those people are at our table to help to make these organizations work. There's no other organization in the UK, in Europe, or in the world that has that sort of people, those sort of people who are dedicated to making things work. And so we have got an unmatched set of resources to bring to those organizations. And that's how we end up doing deals that are, many people would say, outside of our scale. We're too small for what they need, but they would like us in the deal because we can help in specific ways.
So let me see if I can just unpack what I think I just heard you say.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is ImpactX a Black-owned company, which is focusing on underrepresented entrepreneurs, which also include Black businesses and women, but did I just hear that you're also, your investors, or your board and your investors, are actually made up of Black people as well?
Yeah, our original investors are all 100% Black. You can look on our website, we show them to you. Sure. We're very transparent about everything. Like on our website, there is an intake form for entrepreneurs. You just go there and you can apply to see whether or not you fit our criteria, and therefore we'll have a conversation with you about how we'd like to investigate if it's possible to move forward together. www.impactxcapital.com, impactxcapital.com, easy to spell. That's where we are. So you should take a look and you see the people who have dedicated, and these are people who are not just lending their names. So let's be clear, there are many people who will lend their names. These are people who've also put their resources, they put their money where their mouth is and say that this is important enough for me to prioritize a spend in this area.
This is the website here, just for everybody who's watching out there. So this is where you can go. Can you see this as well? Eric, is it showing up?
And that's
Yep.
my team. That's my investment team. So that's Azechi Britton on the left hand side. Azechi was the CTO, the founding CTO of Neighbor, a fintech company that raised 150 million from Goldman Sachs here in the UK. Next to him is Bajela, who invested 200 million on behalf of the 100 billion Japanese bank Mitsui. And she was a lead investor in TransferWise, which has a £5 billion valuation right now. That's me in the middle. Erica Motley is next. Erica is our creative partner. She went to Howard University and then Harvard Business School. She worked at Credit Suisse, and then she went to Fox, Bertelsmann, HBO, all sorts of places. She's done a lot of content deals. She's one of the pioneers behind how do you finance direct to series and direct to streaming content. She lives in Paris. And then the last person is the general partner, Paula Groves, who has had $1 billion of assets under management accumulated over her career and has been a general partner in 3 different venture capital funds on both sides of the Atlantic. Extraordinary.
Wow, awesome. Sounds like this is like that proper A-team, power team, doing some really great stuff. Now, I know you've spoken a lot about technology.
Yeah.
And it seems like, so you mentioned things like, I believe you mentioned building companies like Airbnb, Amazon, which are very platform-based type companies, right? Which have global reach, as we see, and evaluation, as you rightfully pointed out as well, during times of major change, like we're going through right now, their business, Zoom, all of these companies, and they're booming, while your traditional, just physical type businesses are not. So I'm taking from that as ImpactX, you're interested in technology type companies. Fourth industrial revolution that we're going into right now. Here's my theory, and I'd like to know your views about this. So I had a view that we've had the previous revolutions, the industrial revolution, and the previous revolutions before that. For different reasons, we can argue that it was not made equal. The barriers to entry were much higher. But now we're getting into the fourth industrial revolution where people can practically make money from here, right? There's places where they're just coding and doing stuff. Do you think that gives us an opportunity to overcome some of the previous challenges we've faced economically, and also which may have rolled over into our social situations as well?
And us, you mean people of color?
Black people, Black communities, yes, correct.
And Black people in Europe or around the world?
Globally.
So I think that the digital revolution is something which is not without inequalities baked into the system.
Of course.
And that indeed there is a risk that Black people, again, are at the tail end of this industrial revolution, particularly since this one is so heavily capital intensive. Like the other ones were also capital intensive, but this one is capital intensive, and it requires sort of scales of capital. If you think about when Uber finally stopped taking money from investors and went public, Uber had actually gotten billions in terms of investment. And WeWork, what's going south, got billions of investment. Alibaba, all of these organizations. And if you think about it, between 2008 and 2018, $425 billion were invested using venture capital means in the United States. And of that, less than 1% went to Black entrepreneurs.
So that time period again, please.
So
425 billion.
So 2008 to 2018. And so Black people got about 425 million. That's that. And if you're a Black woman, the number is you got 0.00. I think there are 3 zeros and then a 6. So, very little money went to Black women founders. And if you think that capital's a requirement in this evolution and this revolution, and Black people don't have access to capital, then the question of do we actually get left behind in another major way? And we see we've never seen such large income gaps and wealth gaps as we see in this stage of history, where, you know, technology entrepreneurs, technology driven organizations, everything from Disney to wherever, the gap between sort of the amount of money which is made and which is held in a very few hands from even the workers in those companies themselves, if you're working at one of the theme parks and the like, and then other people, the disparity is just so humongous. And if indeed, you know, Black people are not participating in sort of the capital, the capital infusion process, either through loans or through equity, then it's very hard to say that we can actually participate in an equal fashion. And then I believe, although, you know, maybe not as bad as in the past, but still, you know, lagging and not making up the gap. And the gap, you know, and at the top, the gap is tending to accelerate its distance away from the tail. And so,
Mm.
like, so that for me is a cautionary tale. Now, the thing I would say, however, is I still have a great deal of hope, and this is why we're in this business,
Of
because
course.
we also realize that in a single generation, a single company, Jeff Bezos was not Jeff Bezos when I was born. Jeff Bezos has within a lifespan that is seen by a lot of people, able to accumulate a great deal of influence and power. And I'm not talking about wealth, I'm talking about influence and power, such
Of
that he is
course.
spending most of his time with lawmakers talking about whether or not his organization's too big. He's influencing policies, and people are saying we've got to have less. Either we've got to invite, you know, Amazon in so that we can have jobs, or we've got to get rid of Amazon because they're ruining the ozone. But the conversation is about Amazon, and Amazon is maybe powering what we're watching right now in terms of with the cloud. So Amazon is able to influence so many different things. These are the kinds of organizations. I don't think you can name a restaurant chain or a hairdresser that has that ability to say that they are sort of in front of the EU Parliament, that they are in front of the US government on an ongoing basis, and there are laws and other things, and there are lawmakers who are seeking these organizations out, and that they're
Mm.
employing hundreds of thousands of people. That is what we're trying to do with ImpactX. We would like to say that technology is a thing which everyone can understand, that the ideas can come to everyone, and that if we have the capital, we can build those outside organizations which have outside influence, outside resources, outside abilities that will then make for an absolutely sensational, you know, future that we'd all like to participate in, where Black people are empowered and enfranchised. And that's what we're trying to do. So hear me as saying, I think that technology is the way forward. I don't think if you go into agriculture, you know, you might control food sources, but I just don't think that's really the
Or you
same
can
thing.
go into agri-tech.
You can go into agri-tech, and I think agri-tech is fine, but I do think that, you know, it's very hard to name an agri-tech company that has the global reach of an Amazon.
Of course,
And again,
consumerism.
those are much older organizations,
Of
and
course.
it has been, you know, and Google. I mean, I just,
And
you know,
Netflix. I mean, I guarantee that people who are actually on this call right now, somewhere in the house, Netflix is being consumed. Money's being made all over the place.
and even though we're all eating, and probably Cisco or some other distributor is making some of that possible, we just don't. They're even valued very differently. So in
Of
any case,
course. Of course. Of
does that
course.
help with that question? Did that
It
answer?
really did. And you know what? That it not only did it answer my question, but it really just opened my mind. Because in effect, what came to me there is it's not just enough that we have an idea, the next Netflix, the next Amazon idea. Because obviously we know that in our communities, just like any other communities, the ideas are there. But because it's capital intensive, i.e., our Netflix didn't come about just because they had a good idea. It's because people were prepared to fund them,
Mhm,
sometimes for long lead times, like Amazon, before they even become profitable.
mhm.
Then they get the valuations that they see. And without that initial funding, which then for me reinforces why ImpactX exists. Because in effect, you're plugging that gap, which then leads to people building big organizations that can then provide some of the jobs that we're talking about we need in our communities, then start having political influence, which can influence educational system, housing, and some of these other things, the criminal justice system. It goes on and on and on. For me,
Absolutely.
that's very powerful.
I
That's a
think
very powerful.
that's a very concise way of stating it. Brilliant. Exactly what you said. And if you don't understand that as an empowerment cycle, then I think we haven't been effective in this communication, because that is the empowerment cycle. That's what you want to have happen. You want to be able to elect, you know, parliament. You want to be able to influence sort of who comes into the community and who doesn't, and how you're policed, et cetera. You want to influence how medicine is actually delivered. COVID for me has been a very sobering experience. First of all, so many of us died, got ill and then died, and so many of us were forced to work while other people got to stay at home. So many of us are still working while in place while other people are sort of sitting at home in their country houses and that sort of thing. And there are very big disparities there. But it also taught me that if a country decides that something is important enough, a country will stop everything to make sure that they can actually, to make sure that nothing bad happens to that economy. And this is exactly what happened. So if we decided that, the issues of inequity and systemic racism were important enough, we could stop the world to say, let's solve the problem now, instead of saying, I need to put together another study commission in order to maybe think about what evidence exists in order to say that, we can do something small and incremental, because, it's not that important at the moment for us. For me, it's very, very important, and it's important now.
Awesome. Eric, you've really provided so much information. Like I said, one of the great things that I like about doing the show is having guests on, because it also opens up my understanding and knowledge about certain things. You've shared a lot, which has been very helpful to understand, really, especially when it comes to finding the big challenge. I guess it's okay having a business which provides us with an income, but we're talking about now, how do you actually scale and start exiting the business? Just before we wrap up, as we wrap up, what type of exit strategies could people start thinking about or looking at, especially if they're working with ImpactX? Because for some people, they could just build businesses because they just think, well, just keep on ticking it over.
And those are fine businesses. A business that people, when a person that starts a business say, I want to pass this business on to my family, so that we can actually exist in this business for hundreds of years owning it, that's not a company that generally you're going to find an organization like ImpactX. Our motivation is that we have a period during which we're able to invest. People give us money to invest for a period and then to return capital. So you have to do it. And the whole thing is done within a 10-year period. Everything you're going to do has to happen within 10 years. You don't have 20 years, you don't have 15 years, you have 10 years. So because of that, you're motivated in a certain way. And one of the things you're motivated toward is exiting, that you have got to have a way. And exit just means that you get your money back somehow, not through dividends and not through, sort of interest payments, but you have to get it back through extraordinary events in the life cycle of a business that produce outsized wealth and actually are trying to pull forward what might be future value in earnings and the like, and then be able to take some of that today.
So just to clarify, so just for me, so when we say extraordinary events, so in effect, is that selling a large amount of shares or even selling the business for a large amount of money?
Correct. Or going public or being floated on a stock exchange.
Right, okay.
All of those things are opportunities to release capital. That's what it's called. Releasing capital is an exit. Sure. And so you have to figure out how to release that capital.
And just let me jump in and just clarify again. When we're talking about capital there, we're not talking about the amount invested in it. We're talking about actually the valuation of that business, potentially at a future date or the current date.
So you are taking making a current activity, which is the exit. And generally that exit is based on the future value, perceived future value. And it's not future meaning, 20 years from now, but it's between now and 10 years from now. We think that the company will return this much value. And therefore we're going to make sure that you have some of that value today. So it's just drawing all of that forward. And that's what happens with an exit, either an IPO or you're being purchased by another company. And so that's what happens. The vast majority, it's in the 90%, maybe it's even as high as 95, 98% of organizations sell to another company if they exit at all. Most companies never exit. Most companies fail. Let's just be clear. Most companies
of course.
Like if you look at a venture capital portfolio, probably 60 to 80% fail. So you make an investment and it doesn't go well at all. And there are very few that then, become the next Johnson & Johnson, but most just fail completely.
Of course.
So the ones that are the Johnson & Johnson, the way that you actually then get that value is by selling it to another bigger company, or you go public. And those are the sort of two major ways in which money is then taken out of a company or value is realized, or you have an exit. It's all the same thing.
So I've got one last question that just came to me. So right, and we're just wrapping up. Before we spoke about the big organizations who, in effect, in some ways you might argue, become dominant or have a monopoly. And then they have influence on lawmaking and financial institutions, and et cetera, et cetera. Although it may be unethical, is it possible or plausible that some of those organizations might then also use their influence at political and financial levels to stop smaller companies coming up and competing in their marketplace?
Well, you should, well, make sure you watch this space and watch the US government right now is taking on Google. The US government's taking on Apple to see whether or not there is what we would call antitrust, so anti-competitive behavior, which is happening,
Right.
and
Okay.
lawsuits are being filed. The same thing, but in the EU, this happened years ago. That there were concerns that there was too much consolidation of power in some of these organizations, and they actually behaved in anti-competitive ways. And then what is the remedy for a population if indeed that's happening? Because I think you and I would be very upset if we didn't have a Google to help us with search. There are other search engines, but we would be relatively upset if we didn't have the ability just to go to Google and then go to YouTube at the same time and do all sorts of other things. But there's reason to, there are some schools of thought that those are actually very monopolistic, and if not monopolistic, use very uncompetitive, anti-competitive behaviors in order to maintain their market dominance. And that's an interesting thing. That's challenging. I don't know. I wouldn't put a value judgment on it just yet, but I
Yeah,
would say
sure.
it's something that is, we do want organizations to grow because of scale, and there's scaling. We get sort of lower cost of goods and all sorts of other things. And all of us like to save a little money. But the question of if they become so dominant that it drives out competition and then prices rise in a way that doesn't feel to be organic but is sort of usurious and taking advantage of the population, then obviously that's a problem. But it's often too late. If you get to that point, you might be too late to try and address the problem. And so at the moment we see some places saying maybe it is already too late, but we're going to try and redress the issues anyway and rebalance the equation.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So just in wrapping up, last question for you is this. What one thing have you learned along your journey? You have quite a lot of experience. What one thing have you learned that stands out for you, and why?
Being a lone wolf is not a sustainable strategy for building scalable businesses. Scalable businesses require, what we want to see is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees. And that only happens if people are willing to follow you and willing to team, not only just follow you, but to team with you. And that's an important thing. So, although we have a lot of narratives in the world about the person who was the CEO, the inventor of this, that, and the other, it really does take a village. And so I prefer the African proverb applied to business, that collaborations make for the best businesses.
Awesome. And just as we share your website again, so for everybody out there, here's the website. So you go to www.impactxcapital.com. On there, you'll find all the information about Eric and the rest of the team and the type of investments that they're interested in. Also, you'll be able to go on there and contact them if you would like to engage some discussions with them about potential funding. So Eric, I really do appreciate all that you've shared. Do you have any other additional contact details or anything else for people to reach out to you?
That's probably the best place. We love for people to go there. There's lots of news in terms of the articles and the like that we're writing and the places that we're featured. And you can find out a little bit of our portfolio and compare yourself to those organizations in which we've invested. So I think that's a good place for people to start.
Awesome. All right. Once again, all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much. Thank you for everything that I've learned from this. And then I will be in contact soon. And we'll speak soon. And to your listeners out there, so you've heard it. Once again, this is one of the reasons why I love doing these shows. When we demonstrate, right, we got an organization here which is Black-owned, backed by Black investors. So that's putting money where the mouth is. Start building real companies, big companies that, potentially are going to create, as we hear there, thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, which address some of the issues that we've spoken about. We heard there also that those are the type of organizations that can tend to have political influence because, cash and politics, they go hand in hand. That's a whole nother discussion. So once again, Eric, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And to all our listeners, catch you next week.
Thank you. Well done.
Bye-bye.